Time capsule of Kapoloi, deposited on the site of the New York World's Fair on September the 23rd, 1938 by the Westinghouse Electric and Manufacturing Company. If anyone should come upon this capsule before the year AD 6939, let him not wantonly disturb it, for to do so would be to deprive the people of that era of the legacy here left them. Cherish it, therefore, in a safe place. On September the 23rd, 1938, on the site of the Westinghouse Electric and Manufacturing Company exhibit of the 1939 to 1940 New York World's Fair, a massive 800-pound tube was buried 50 feet deep in the ground. Inside the tube were numerous items familiar to any contemporary household. A booklet published by Westinghouse explained the purpose of the project. 5,000 years from now, the people of the future will look back upon us as we looked back upon the early Egyptians, Sumerians, and Babylonians. It was the plan of Westinghouse engineers to provide them with more knowledge of us than we have of any of the ancient peoples who lived before us. It was a noble goal, but had a more immediate purpose. As the country was fighting its way out of the Great Depression, it was a perfect time to look to the future with hope and optimism. This played into the World of Tomorrow theme of the 1939 to 1940 World's Fair perfectly. The idea of human beings 5,000 years in the future opening the time capsule, it captured the imagination of almost everyone. The contents of the time capsule included materials and information touching upon all the principal categories of our thought, activity, and accomplishment, sparing nothing, neither our wisdom nor our foolishness, our supreme achievements, nor our recognized weaknesses. In conjunction with creating the capsule, 3,000 copies of something known as the Book of Record were made, listing such things as how to locate the capsule and also how to determine when it's time to open it, in case all contemporary major methods of keeping track of what year it is have gone the way of the dodo, with nobody remembering how long ago 1939 is when it's time to open the capsule. Those involved with the project accomplished this by giving the precise alignment of the planets in our solar system on 0 hour of January the 1st, 1939, referencing 2 eclipses of the Sun and Moon to occur in 1939 and noting the mean position of the North Star on January the 1st. They then note that, in the opinion of our astronomers, such a combination of astronomical events is unlikely to recur for many thousands of years. By computing backward from their time, people of the future will therefore be able to determine the number of years that have elapsed since our time. In determining the contents of the capsule, they even accounted for such things as the English language being lost or otherwise unreadable in its present form to future generations, giving a key to English among other such tools to translate the language. These many copies of the Book of Record were distributed to museums, libraries, and monasteries throughout the world, so knowledge of the existence of the capsule would not be forgotten. The book concluded with this statement: "Each age considers itself the pinnacle and final triumph above all eras that have gone before. In our time, many believe that the human race has reached the ultimate in material and social development. Humanity shall march onward to achievements splendid beyond the imagination of this day, to new worlds of human wealth, power, life, and happiness. We choose, with the latter, to believe that men will solve the problems of the world, that the human race will triumph over its limitations and its adversities, and the future will be glorious. To the people of that future, we leave this legacy." And now for a bonus fact. Speaking of burying things, being buried alive today is considered a bit of an irrational fear. However, once upon a time, it wasn't that unheard of for people to be buried alive. Indeed, in 1896, T.M. Montgomery, who was supervising the disinterment of remains at the Fort Randall Cemetery, reported that a little over 2% of those bodies exhumed were definitely victims of being accidentally buried alive. In other words, 2% woke up, tried to claw their way out, leaving visible signs of this, and were unable to do so. Given the oxygen supply in a coffin doesn't last that long, it is likely the actual percentage of people being buried alive was actually higher when you include the ones who didn't wake but were still technically alive when buried. The reason the rate of being buried alive was quite high in the 17th and 18th centuries was primarily due to the high number of people dying of various diseases like cholera, smallpox, etc. These people tended to not get a close investigation to make sure they were really dead rather than just passed out, and they also tended to be buried pretty quickly to prevent the spread of whatever disease they were thought to have died from. Moving back a bit, in the 17th century, William Tebb compiled 219 instances of narrow escapes from premature burial, 149 cases of actual premature burial, 10 cases in which bodies were accidentally dissected before death, and 2 cases in which embalming was started while the person was still living. On that note, one famous case of an embalming death in 1837 was that of Cardinal Somglia, who had been taken ill and passed out. Because he was a very important church official, preparations to embalm him were made. When the surgeon cut into his chest to instill embalming materials, he saw the cardinal's heart was still beating. At this point, the cardinal himself woke up, but died shortly thereafter from the incision in his chest. As for known people who survived being buried alive historically, they tended to have grave robbers to thank. In one such case, Marjorie Elphinstone died and was buried in Scotland. When grave robbers attempted to steal the jewelry she was buried with, she woke up. The robbers fled and she proceeded to walk home and ended up outliving her husband who had buried her by 6 years. Another lucky one was the case of Matthew Wall in the 16th century. One of his pallbearers tripped, causing the other pallbearers to drop the coffin. This revived Wall inside the coffin. He signaled for help, and he went on to live for several more years. Among the more heartbreaking of these tales, where the person didn't survive, is an instance in the 1850s when a young girl was buried in South Carolina, supposedly dying from diphtheria. She was buried in the family's mausoleum. When the family's son died later in the Civil War, the tomb was opened to admit him. They found the skeleton of the little girl, not where they had placed her body, but rather just behind the locked door on the floor. In any event, fear of being buried alive ultimately led to the invention of safety coffins. These coffins were specifically designed to either allow the person in the coffin to get out if they were still alive after burial, or more commonly, designed to give the person in the coffin the ability to alert the outside world of them still being among the living. One example of these was designed by Count Karnitze Katsanitsky. He was inspired to design a coffin like this when he was thoroughly shaken up upon attending the funeral of a Belgian girl. Upon being lowered into the dug hole and dirt starting to be placed on her coffin, the little girl apparently woke up and started screaming. She was taken out of the coffin and found to be completely fine. The Count then set out to design a coffin that allowed a person accidentally buried alive to summon help. The coffin had a tube 3.5 inches in diameter extending into a box on the surface. The tube was attached to a spring-loaded ball sitting on the corpse's chest. Any movement of the chest would release the spring, opening the box lid and admitting light and air into the coffin. A flag would then spring up on the surface and a bell would ring continually for half an hour. In addition to this, a lamp would light and stay lit for about half an hour in the case of the movement happening at night. Loads of other such safety coffins have been designed since then, and the practice still goes on today, even though to date we couldn't find a single record of any safety coffin being used successfully, in terms of a person being buried alive in one and then eventually using it to survive the ordeal. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, hit that thumbs up button below and don't forget to subscribe. When you're subscribing, hit that notification bell so you actually find out when we put out new videos. That would be grand. And as always, I'll see you next time.